Hello and welcome to the Washington Institute. I'm Grant Rumley, the Meisel-Goldberger Senior Fellow here and the Director of the Glazer Foundation Program on Great Power Competition and the Middle East. Today we will be discussing the conflict between Israel and Iran. I think it's safe to say we are witnessing the most impactful military developments in the region in over 2 decades. Israel commenced military operations 8 days ago on June 13th in an opening wave of airstrikes against Iranian regime targets, to include air and missile defense systems, ballistic missile launchers, and key personnel. Since then, the Israeli Air Force has continued its campaign to include Iranian nuclear facilities. All eyes are on the U.S. and whether or not Washington will enter the fray militarily. Last night, President Trump issued a statement seemingly indicating a renewed push towards some form of negotiations. Quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks." Earlier this week, the Washington Institute hosted a discussion on the strategic and military implications of the opening round of this conflict. That event was moderated by our director, Rob Satloff, and included several of our senior military and defense experts, including Dana Stroll, Mike Eisenstadt, Dennis Ross, and Zohar Palti. Today, we will feature several other senior Institute scholars to discuss the broader implications of the current Israel-Iran conflict. We will be zooming out slightly to consider the second and third order repercussions of this conflict on the region and beyond. Today, we're lucky to be joined by Anna Borshevskaya, the Institute's Harold Grinspoon Senior Fellow and an expert on Russian foreign policy. She is the author of the 2021 book, Putin's War in Syria, Russian Foreign Policy and the Price of America's Absence. We'll also be joined by Mike Knights, the Jill and Jay Bernstein Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute. Mike is the founder of the Institute's Militia Spotlight platform and has published widely on the military and security affairs of Iraq, Iran, and the Gulf states. We'll also be joined by Farzin Nadimi, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute and an expert on the security and defense affairs of Iran. Finally, we'll be joined by Asaf Orion, the Liz and Moni Reuven International Fellow at the Washington Institute. Asaf is a retired brigadier general in the Israeli military and was most recently the head of the strategic division in the planning directorate of the IDF General Staff. We will start with a series of questions for our panelists before kicking over to questions from you, the audience. If you do have a question, please feel free to post it in the Zoom Q&A function or email policyforum@washingtoninstitute.org. That's policyforum, all one word, at washingtoninstitute.org. Anna, let's start with you. Earlier this week, you predicted that when push came to shove, Putin would not intervene in the current round of conflict and would find some type of technicality to keep Russia's support at perhaps the diplomatic level at best. A couple hours later, Putin then just announced that. Given your insights into Putin and how he thinks, what do you think the ideal end state is for him in this moment?
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Grant. I'd like to start answering this question by looking at Russia's overall primary objectives. Because when we talk about end states, that's a very Western view of looking at issues. We always want to know how things end. But from the Russian perspective, it's an ongoing fluid situation, and the game is always present. It never ends. With that in mind, Russia is focused on a confrontation with the West globally. This confrontation is playing out primarily in Ukraine, but the Middle East is an important part of this confrontation. So Putin always positioned himself as somebody who could talk to opposing sides in the Middle East. And certainly he built good ties with everyone across the region. But in reality, he empowered anti-American forces, and that is chiefly Iran, its proxies, and until recently, the Assad regime. But if we zoom out even further, since the invasion of Ukraine, Russia has aligned itself closer not only with Iran, but also China and North Korea. If you look at these issues through this prism, as the Kremlin does, one would potentially think that helping Iran would be one way to go, but Russia is playing a more cautious, careful game here. What they would want to do, I see ideally, is some sort of a ceasefire with Russia involved as a mediator. And that's why we immediately saw the Russian government, on the one hand, condemning Israel, but on the other hand, quickly saying that this conflict needs to end and Russia is willing to put itself as a mediator. Certainly, if Russia is accepted as a mediator in this scenario, it would take Russia out of international isolation. It would divert from Ukraine, and it would once again position Russia as somebody that should be listened to rather than being treated as a pariah. Of course, this scenario is divergent on a number of levels with the U.S. and Israel. For one thing, one other thing to keep in mind is that Russia's traditional primary concern is that Iran would turn pro-Western. Far more than the Iranian nuclear program, Moscow worried that Iran would turn pro-Western. And frankly, that is the Kremlin's biggest worry at the moment. So concerns of regime collapse in Tehran would be far more worrisome for Moscow than it would be for the United States or Israel. And certainly making sure that Iran does not develop a nuclear weapon is not Russia's primary concern. It is a much more primary concern for the United States and Israel. And that, I think, that sets the stage for our discussion. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Anna. Mike Knights, let's go over to you. So far, I think it's fair to say we've seen little response from the Iranian-aligned militias in Iraq, elsewhere in the region, parts of Syria. The Houthi response has been, I think, muted in some ways. We've seen some sporadic fire, perhaps, but not perhaps on the scale that we may have anticipated before a conflict of this size. Is that a fair assessment in your view? And if so, why is that the case?
Thanks very much, Grant. I'll say this, after October 7th, 2023, the axis of resistance also paused for a moment to consider how it was going to be involved, meaning Lebanese Hezbollah, Iraqi militias, the Houthis. When they did get involved, it was kind of a bit chaotic. It was linked not to their main demand, which was to say the US needs to stay out of the fight, or we will enter on Hamas's side. But instead, it was after the Al Ali hospital explosion, if you remember, and that kind of outrage. And then many of them got involved at that point, even though it was not actually what they had been attempting to deter. Well, this time around, I think we've seen the axis of resistance be more purposeful and more cohesive in its non-involvement. We're a similar number of days in as when the axis of resistance joined last time. It could still join in force, and it's conditioning its joining into the war on the US entering, on Israel's side. So very similar to last time, except that this time they actually seem to be pretty cohesive and restrained. Hezbollah came out very quickly and said, Iran doesn't seem to need us to join at this stage. The Iraqi militias have thundered, but they've essentially said the same thing. The Houthis obviously continued to strike Israel because they were already on a continuum of conflict with Israel before June 12th, 13th, Israeli operations began. The Houthis, interestingly, are saying we should be focused on preventing Israel from being allowed to access Arab airspace over the intervening countries like Syria, Iraq, instead of being focused on US entry. And of course, when you condition the axis of resistance's entry into the conflict on US entry, you may well be simply giving that axis a reason to sit out the war and to sit out until the US enters. So it kind of gives the Axis players something to do, in theory, deterring US entry, even though, it's not really, those actors that are deterring US entry. The US has simply not made a decision to enter yet. I'd say that, since the last time they had this kind of decision in October 2023, the axis of resistance has seen Hamas destroyed, Hezbollah leadership destroyed, the Assad regime go down, and the Iraqi militias themselves suffered pretty significant targeted leadership strikes between December 2023 and April 2024. So they're all quite keen, I think, to sit this one out. We haven't seen any attacks on US bases in Iraq in Iraq for sure. And we haven't seen a lot of evidence of strikes coming out of Iraq towards US bases in Syria, Jordan, the Gulf, or against Gulf states or against Israel. But I'll just say this in finishing. We are seeing examples over the last 24 hours of shorter range Iranian-provided drone systems crashed in Iraq. You know, most of the drone systems that have been crashing in Iraq have been very long-range systems that clearly were shot down in Iraq by the US because they came too close to US bases. These are not the sort of systems you would use against US bases in Iraq because they have 4 times the range required and are essentially Israel drone or cruise missile systems. What we're now seeing is Shahed 101 systems coming down in Iraq over the last 24 hours. And if you were firing them from Iran, they wouldn't even make it to Israel. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense that these would be moving through. It indicates that either they're being fired at US bases in Syria over Iraq, or they're being fired more likely out of Iraq at some target further to the west, potentially Al-Tanf, the US base at Al-Tanf in Syria. So we may be starting to see a few warning shots being fired by Iran-backed groups in Iraq, or shots that are being fired from extreme western Iran over Iraq at targets far short of Israel's borders. Over.
Thanks so much, Mike. Farzin, let's drill down a little bit on that Iranian response. What do you think the next phase of Iran's response militarily will look like? I think we've seen the ballistic missile numbers decrease, striking into Israel over recent days, but we've also seen a more devastating damage as well. Can you unpack that for us and maybe shed some light on what we can expect to see in the next few days?
You're on mute.
Sorry. To look at where Iran's campaign is heading in the next few days and weeks, especially after the serious blow they received from the Israeli forces, we have to first look at the big pictures. Iran's military strategy, yes, it stood under missile force pillars, but they also dependent on the ability to defend their airspace, their air defense forces, the combined air defense command, they call it the Khatam al-Anbiya air defense command. That included both the RGC and Artesh assets. They were given the first priority by the Supreme Leader for quite a long time. There was a lot of investment in Iran's air defenses to expand across Iran and to create as much as an integrated air defense system and impenetrable airspace as possible. So the Iranian strategic missile forces could have the free hand to operate across western and northwestern Iran to fire missiles at Israel, and also in southern Iran to fire missiles at US bases and other strategic targets in the south, in the Persian Gulf region. Yes, their missile bases are very hardened, but also a lot of their transporter launchers are mobile, and they are required to exit those protected tunnels into the open, and missiles need to be prepared for launch. So they need some safe time to prepare and launch their missiles if they want to launch large barrages. So what we have seen so far is Iran, yes, Iran has been pushing hard, but not recklessly. The original barrages of missiles at Israel consisted of 50 missiles each, and 3 barrages per 24 hours. They have now subsided quite significantly, so they are not acting recklessly. We remember claims by the now late Air Force and Missile Force Commander General Hajizadeh that they could launch as many as 600 missiles at Israel at any given barrage. That never materialized, and it shows that after Israel's direct strikes inside Iran, including the killing of those top commanders, but also striking at missile launchers and missile bases, Iran had to preserve its capabilities. They originally responded with multiple rounds of drone and missile attacks, but the volume and impact of those attacks have clearly tapered off. That tells us 2 things. First, Israel's preemptive strikes and also missile defenses are working. Second, Iran is recalibrating and maybe conserving its resources, as I mentioned, maybe rethinking that escalation looks like as if the US might get directly involved as well. So for the long term, and especially considering the fact that possibly they're not going to get restocked anytime soon, given the heavy blow that their missile industries are receiving. They are now conserving a number of their missiles, but that doesn't mean that damage is not done, because it seems that they are now shifting from bigger, less accurate missiles now to smaller and more modern, more accurate, and more powerful missiles, and especially more survivable. So they can achieve the same effect that they wanted, or close to the same effect that they wanted, with fewer number of missiles. Today, I guess we heard that just 1 missile was launched at Beersheba, and that 1 missile hit the ground. So what might happen next? In the short term, Iran will likely continue launching missiles and drones at Israel, but in a smaller, more calculated ways. They will probably prioritize accuracy and survivability over brute force salvos, as we already noticed. We are seeing signs of that already. And over time, though, Iran may try to change the nature of the fight. It could introduce new weapons, like more advanced drones, probably, or more advanced missiles like Khorramshahr 4, which apparently hasn't been used yet. And some kind of experimental missiles might be used as well, with like Fatah 2, which has a hypersonic cruise missile. They have not entered service yet, so even if they are used, they will be in very, very few numbers. Iran might also turn to more cyber attacks, sabotage, terrorism, regional networks of proxies, as many as proxy networks that can be rehabilitated and put to use. Iran might try to use them. And one of the main goals is to keep pressure on Israel without crossing the line that would trigger direct US military intervention. I think Iran still is walking that tightrope. Iran might decide at some point to cause trouble in the Strait of Hormuz and threaten the freedom of shipping in the Gulf. However, that will be done in a very smart way, probably different from previous threats, or how it was done before. They will allow Chinese tankers or ships related to allied countries, but they will try to specifically threaten shippings related to Western countries. But at the end, if the things get really tough, Iran might resort to more other effects, like mining of the Gulf sea mines or CC lanes, and then to cause panic in the oil markets. I think that will be one of the aims. And but I don't think at the short term Iran will threaten the oil installations in the Gulf region unless its own oil installations is severely disrupted and attacked by Israel. And the U.S. bases in the region, they are already emptied of personal equipment to a large degree. So if Iran is going to decide to any perceived U.S. involvement in airstrikes, for example, against Fordo, I think Iran will limit that action to very limited number of precise missile attacks against empty parts of the U.S. bases, so they will not cause any to make sure that no significant damage is caused. But the risk is always there, and they will try to avoid inflicting casualties on the U.S. forces if the U.S. is involved at some point in the future.
Outstanding. Thanks so much, Farzin. Really appreciate it. Asaf, let's go over to you for the same question. What does the next phase of this conflict look like for Israel? What's Israel's military strategy in the next few days and weeks?
Well, good afternoon. I think we need to appreciate that at a strategic level, Iran found itself in direct war with Israel after, eternally preferring to fight by proxy from other people's lands, by other people's hands, and paying with other people's blood. So that's a new, I think, uncomforting situation for Iran. It's three pillars of offensive power. That's nuclear, missiles, and proxies are challenged and undermined. And its defense, as Farzin mentioned, and also its deterrence are heavily undermined. Operationally, at the operational level, we have an unprecedented situation in which Israel enjoys almost total freedom of action in Iranian airspace, which allows it to wage a long, continuous offensive campaign, precision strike, intelligence-driven, again and again, wave after wave, without serious threats from the first tier, the Ring of Fire, Hezbollah, Hamas, and so on. And at the same time, we're suffering incoming missiles to our population centers. About 5% of them go through and impact the ground. And when impacting, they're quite disastrous to the local impact environment. So I think what Israel looks at into the future is first as an offensive effort to continue and degrade Iran's nuclear program, throughout the supply chain from the early stages of uranium enrichment all the way to conversion, weaponization, and centrifuges factories, and so on. Surface-to-surface missiles, again, from the tip of the missiles and the launching crews to the units, to the sites, to the factories, to everything connected with ballistics. Air defense, Farzin mentioned, the leadership of the military, of course, nuclear scientists, and so on. But Israel also expanded its aims without committing to a specific achievement, but talking about undermining the regime stability and actually attacking targets which are regime stability related. So this is on that side, and beyond this, if escalation continues and Israel wants to punish Iran for targeting its population, one can also think about economic targets. Some of those You can already hear about why cyber attacks on the banking sector in Iran, some of the energy aspects of local consumption, not yet export. And the futures we're looking into are first and foremost, right now there is an evident contest between Israel's defensive efforts of intercepting missiles and drones incoming from Iran, suppressing launches. And the contest is who will run out of air first, out of oxygen, Israel's air defenses or Iran's launching capabilities. When we look at the future, you can say, okay, this can continue until the war goals are achieved. In talking about the nuclear and ballistic degradation, the U.S. May intervene. I think we're at that juncture in time when it's unclear if America will join also offensively. But the war, as often happens, might expand itself, become something more regional or something more escalatory, and that's a challenge. Beyond the war, when all this is over, there will be a challenge of translating the military achievements by the U.S. To complete something about the nuclear program, to deal with Gaza, and maybe to even expand the Abraham Accords, and so on. At the end of the day, although it's the fireworks are very impressive, things will depend more or less about less on what Israel will hit, and more about what Iran will have at the end of the day remaining in its hands and what it will decide to do with that. There's capability aspects here, capacity aspects, and calculus may all be affected by the great fireworks that we're watching. I'll stop here.
Thanks so much, Asaf. Anna, let's go back to you real quick. We're sitting here on the precipice of potential U.S. involvement. We don't really know what it will look like or how the president will decide to weigh in on this current round of hostilities. How do you think Putin is looking at this U.S. decision right now? Is it perhaps net positive for him that the U.S. is once again distracted in the Middle East? Is it perhaps more negative in that the U.S. is again reasserting itself as sort of the single most powerful external actor in the Middle East? How do you think he's viewing this current situation vis-a-vis the competition between Russia and the U.S.?
So I would say at present, given where we are today, the positives and negatives almost cancel each other out. There are a few issues to consider here, and I'll go into each one of them in more detail. First, of course, as you mentioned, Grant, it's the distraction of the West from Ukraine to the Middle East. There's also the issue of potential rise in oil prices. Discussion of Russia as a potential mediator, and at the same time, reputational damage for Russia for not coming to Iran's rescue. So first, let me say a few words about each one. The Western distraction from Ukraine for Putin is a good thing. He wants the West to forget about the fact that he's waging the largest war on European soil since World War II, and he wants to win this war, and he also, I think, believes he can win this war. His reputation very much is staked on this war more than any other. Second, potential rise in oil prices. What was interesting is we saw a very quick spike of 7% in oil prices, but then immediately prices went down. So it's very interesting to see what might happen here. But if oil prices rise in a meaningful way, that would very much empower Putin to fight his war in Ukraine. It would give him more resources to fight this war of aggression. Third, Russia's mediation. At this point, there are no serious takers. From what I've seen, responses from Europeans, from Israel, and even most recently from Trump. Although he was fairly he said a lot of different things, but most recently he seems to have indicated he's not interested in Russian mediation. So that is a net negative for Putin. Nobody is buying Russian mediation anymore. Lastly, reputational damage for Putin for not coming to Iran's rescue. Here's what's interesting about the situation. Russia and Iran have a strategic partnership. They signed a strategic partnership document in January. And when people were looking at, when commentators were talking about what Russia might do, a lot of them were citing this agreement. But the fact of the matter is, if you actually read it, that agreement does not obligate for Russia to come to Iran's defense and vice versa. And so when I was writing my commentary earlier, this is one of the things that I pointed out. And what Putin had said later is precisely that. He said that there's nothing in the treaty that obligates Russia to come to Iran's rescue. And second, and I wrote that as well, Iran did not formally ask Russia for support. So those two are very important things. Still, there's the technicality, of course, of this issue, but then there's also the spirit. And in spirit, certainly Putin sided closely, as I mentioned earlier, with Iran and its proxies. So when everybody is watching Russia, who is supposedly has this important partnership with Iran, stand on the sidelines, there is serious reputational damage to Russia. So Russia is not looking great in the Middle East right now from that perspective. But the question is, how much of a damage is there really? And the counterweight to that is that Russia still wants to maintain good ties with the Gulf states. And it really does want to maintain this balancing act of being friends with everyone. It's playing a double game, essentially. And so the jury is still out on how big this reputational damage is really going to be. And so for all these reasons, I say there's, at this stage where we are specifically today, the situation is the negatives almost balance out the positives. But so by and large, Russia is sitting this one out. Putin, I think, is watching these events with a lot of caution, but at the same time, fairly secure that Russia's position overall is not in any danger unless there is regime collapse in Tehran. I think, and this is the big question for Putin specifically, and I think what worries him, regime collapse in Tehran, potential, again, of Iran turning pro-Western, that would do a lot of damage to not only to his position in the region, but overall for his bigger geopolitical global calculus.
Amazing. Thank you, Anna. Mike Knight, you touched on it a little bit earlier about the Iranian-aligned proxies. I wonder if you could take us on a tour of the neighborhood and walk us down the Sesame Street of the various aligned Iranian proxy groups. And in particular, perhaps walk us through their calculations about entering the fray here at some point. But in particular, we got a question from the audience regarding the Houthi capabilities after both the U.S. campaign and some of the initial Israeli strikes. Perhaps you could dive into that a little bit as well and walk us through just what the Houthis have to offer at this moment.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so I think one of the things that Asaf would probably agree with, and maybe Farzin as well, being that both look at the missile issues across the region. You know, the Iranians have developed domestically some really powerful missile production industries and drone production industries. And I think they've transferred a lot more of that outside than people perhaps expected, including to the Houthis and to Lebanese Hezbollah. Now, Lebanese Hezbollah, their capability, like that of the Iranians now, you know, has been taken apart to some extent. I'm not sure the Houthi one has been taken apart. They still have a line of supply that is difficult to operate between Iran and Yemen, or between international markets and Yemen, to bring in dual-use machinery and things that can be used for making missiles and drones. But, you know, I think it's fair to say that the Houthis have demonstrated deeper arsenals than we had hoped. The Iranians also probably have deeper arsenals, you know, than we would hope. So, when it comes to Houthi capability, they've got the capability to fire increasingly advanced medium-range ballistic missiles at Israel for the foreseeable future until we get a change in regime in Sana'a in the north of Yemen, or completely cut them off from external resupply, which I think is pretty difficult to do. So, they will remain the primary and most effective proxy when it comes to using large-scale conventional military capability to either threaten Israel or shipping all the Gulf states and US military bases in the region. They also in a kind of category of their own when it comes to how they're viewed and treated. If the Houthis go do something against Saudi Arabia probably doesn't have to completely break relations with Iran at that moment. The Houthis may be given a degree, or they'd be viewed with a degree of independence and a degree of special undeterrability that makes them quite useful for hitting third-party locations, not the US and not within Yemen, but somewhere else. I think Iraqi militias have some of that utility too. At some point in this crisis, we may well see a range of drones come out of southern Iraq, go into the Gulf states, and Iran not be directly involved, but they'll be able to demonstrate there are parts of our entire system that may be more willing to blame the Gulf states than we are at this time. They could come out of Houthi Yemen, they could come out of Iraqi areas too. And so I think there's a utility in the axis of resistance when it comes to taking escalation options that the Iranians themselves might not want to take at this exact moment. It's not about fighting to the last Arab necessarily, but it is about those environments in Iraq and in Yemen, it being less dangerous to the overall axis of resistance for a retaliation to fall in those environments than somewhere else. And I think the primary thing that would trigger that is either the death of Khamenei. I mean, any of the very dramatic escalation options by the axis of resistance could come if the supreme leader dies. They could come if the US gets involved in kinetic strikes inside Iran. Those would probably be the two main triggers. Does that answer the question, Grant?
I think so. Thanks a ton, Mike. I think that's great. Let's go over to Farzin here. Farzin, perhaps you can shed a little bit of light on the current command and control dynamics within the Iranian military apparatus writ large. You talked a little bit briefly about the IRGC and the conventional Iranian military, the Artesh. What's the dynamic between the two right now? How is that playing out in Iran's potential response? We've seen, a lot of senior Iranian military leadership get taken off the board by Israel in the past week or so. What's the current state of play there?
Well, the loss of so many IRGC commanders was a big deal. Iran lost the IRGC chief, the Armed Forces chief of staff, the head of the Air Force and Missile Program, and later the head of intelligence. And there was a great deal of reshuffle. And Khamenei rushed to replace them with other confidants, either among the Artesh, the National Armed Forces, or the IRGC. The commander of the IRGC ground forces replaced the IRGC commander, and General Mousavi, who is an Artesh top commander, was appointed as the head of the Armed Forces General Staff, which is the first time in the history of the Islamic Republic. So far, only IRGC officers would take that top job. Now, General Mousavi is at the top, but it doesn't mean that there is going to be a significant difference or changes in how the armed forces of Iran operate. The preference is still the IRGC, and the supremacy of the IRGC will still be in place. But no, within days that these new commanders were appointed, operations kept going. Well, the disruptions was from an outside force. The Israelis, however, focused their attention on the IRGC. Yes, there were some Artesh bases also targeted, the air bases that were targeted, and some other bases like the Army Aviation, but the focus was on air defense, which is shared by both the National Armed Forces and the Air Defense Force, and also the IRGC Air Defense Command. But also the focus was on the strategic missile forces. That is the only is the turf of the IRGC. The Artesh has no long-range missiles or medium-range missiles. So it seems that Israel tried to focus this attention on the IRGC because of its revolutionary role, its zealousness, its role in supporting the proxies in the past, and threatening Israel, and also because if there is going at some point change at the top levels of leadership in Iran, Artesh is the main hope to replace IRGC as the main security force, and therefore many of Artesh personnel, especially the middle and lower ranks, are still they do not. They're not fan of the regime. They're not fan of the IRGC, and therefore they. People hope that Artesh can at some point replace IRGC as their saviors, as the guarantors of Iran, and we have seen that not many Artesh units have been attacked so far. On the other side, Israel have been very careful to also target those very headquarters, those very bases, and those very units from either IRGC, special police units, notorious Yagana Vijay, or notorious special units of the police, and Basij, that were very much involved in suppressing popular uprisings in Iran. Those bases, those people were targeted by Israel, apparently as a message to the Iranian people that now they can come to the streets and take the matters into their own hands. Probably that was one message. But on the surface, this crisis has pushed Iran's two military pillars, the IRGC and Artesh, closer together. The official media tries to portray that, but and obviously, as I said, some parts of them, especially air defense, had been targeted equally. But historically, there had been frictions, and I think that friction will remain or expand. Now, the Artesh, the lower ranks of Artesh, see how the regime portrayed by the IRGC and protected by the IRGC have been responsible with everything that has happened to the country, notwithstanding its nuclear project, but also the facade of the armed forces. They certainly will blame the IRGC, and I think even though it's not very obvious now, but the friction between the Artesh and the IRGC will expand in the future, but Supreme Leader, I think he's unhappy equally with both forces. He will, in the future, if he's in power, if Iran is allowed to have its strategic missile force, I think there is going to be a lot of investment by whoever is now replaced the Hajizadeh as the head of the IRGC missile force, and they will try to rehabilitate, to rebuild, to shift as much money as possible to these military projects to rebuild their capabilities again. And more money will go to IRGC, less money to Artesh, and I think that will be another source for friction in the future. The current commanders, wherever they are, either Artesh or IRGC, the top commanders of Artesh are very loyal. I don't think that will change the dynamics at the top levels. And the current top IRGC commanders, I don't think they will change the day-to-day operations of those forces, because even Salami or Hajizadeh, they were more motivators than military thinkers, and their removal, I don't think that will change a lot. Mostly hardware, and now they have lost a lot of hardware and infrastructure, and they will focus on directing resources into rebuilding them, but if possible and when possible. Over.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Farzin. That was incredibly fascinating. Asaf, we have a question from the audience here about how Israel views the 2-week window established by President Trump last night with regards to the potential for the U.S. to get involved militarily. Perhaps as a former planner in the IDF, you could walk us through how the Israeli military is thinking through the various scenarios where the U.S. may or may not get involved, especially from a defense standpoint.
Well, it's a good question. First, I would point to the fact that the White House said that decisions will be made within the next 2 weeks. That could be an hour away or up to 2 weeks. And the president is known as liking this 2-week, a fortnight frame. Let's wait 2 weeks and see what happens. Now, I think that the planning of the time dimension requests or requires that the IDF continues its ongoing attacks as time permits, with the great decision of Fordope probably waiting to understand where the US goes if the US takes it with the GBU 37, or Israel has to address it on its own. I think those are the main things. I suspect that Israel and America do not learn about each other's plans from the media, but are really engaged in deep level dialogues on the leadership level, but also on the CENTCOM and the military level.
Terrific. Thanks, Asaf. We have a question from the audience here, I think for Anna and Farzin. The question concerns, has this recent campaign by Israel hindered Iran's ability to continue shipping drones and missiles to Russia? And perhaps, we could start by answering, have we seen any indication of that? And then B, perhaps forecast a little bit the Iran-Russia military relationship from here on out. Let's start with Anna and then go to Farzin for this. And then, of course, if anyone else wants to jump in, feel free.
Sure. Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Thank you. Thank you for asking. I think one thing to know about the drones is that the Shahed drones specifically is that while Iran did a lot to help Russia with drones in the earlier parts of Russia's campaign in Ukraine, Russia resented this dependence on Iran, and they've taken steps to eliminate that dependence. They've reverse engineered a lot of these drones. They've also created alternative supply chains. And while there are, Iran is still helping Russia, it's simply not nearly as a primary an issue as it was before. So specifically, drones are just not the primary avenue of Russia-Iran relationship anymore. They certainly were, but that has changed. The other thing to answer the question that I want to highlight is that, and that's more to the forecasting of the future Russia-Iran relationship. Russia is being very cautious right now. They are not actively supporting Iran to the extent that we can see out in the open, although there are rumors floating about family members from the Iranian regime fleeing to Moscow. But I would end with a kind of caution that Russia could do more to support Iran. And that has to do with some of the bigger themes that I've touched on about Russia's global confrontation with the West and how it affects Russia's position, specifically in the region. So I would not, depending on how things develop, and they can develop in a number of ways, I would not rule out Russia doing more to support Iran.
Thanks, Anna. Farzin?
Well, as Anna mentioned, I think Shaheds have now Shaheds are Ground 2 drones, as they call them in Russia have already entered their fourth generation. And a lot of the technologies that are now using the newer generation of these drones are either indigenous or, as Anna mentioned, sourced from elsewhere. Therefore, Russia, after Iran completed delivery of components for the first 6,000 drones that Russia ordered, some of them are produced in Iran and some of them in Tatarstan. It seems that Russia is more or less self-sufficient in terms of drone production. I'm not sure about the engines for the piston engines for those drones. They might Iran might still have been supplying those to Russia. And I still haven't heard that Israel has bombed the particular factory that produces those drone engines. But in terms of those long-range Shahed drones, I think any production in Iran will shift into more modern versions and try to just restock their own existing supplies. I don't think Iran will have a chance to sign another big agreement with Russia. As I mentioned, Russia is now very much self-sufficient in its drone program. And with other supplies, it is possible that Iran will seek S-400 from Russia. And we have to wait and see whether Russia will agree to sell Iran or to deliver to Iran. Even if they sign agreements for S-400s, it is yet to be seen if, given the Ukraine war is still ongoing, whether Russia will deliver those S-400 systems to Iran. It is also a possibility that Iran will, for its, when there are so much, when the indigenous systems didn't deliver as much as it was hoped, Iran might again look for foreign sources for different systems. And if Russia doesn't deliver S-400s, probably Iran will seek help from China. And we have heard recently that there have been some transport planes landing in Iran originating from China. We can only assume that there might be some equipment related to air defense that Chinese might have provided to Iran. But with regard to Russia, I think the cooperation is very cautious right now. Russia doesn't want to anger Israel, and we have the experience of Russia, Iran, Israel dynamics in Syria. I don't think that will change a lot here in the Iran theater of operation as well.
Thanks, Farzin. That's great. And you mentioned China, and we haven't talked about China yet, but we do have some questions regarding China's role in this entire episode. Asaf, perhaps we could go over to you and just get your 2 cents on what you see as China's strategic calculus in this current round of hostilities.
Currently, I think China is taking a cautious line. Diplomatically, they're calling both sides for, restraint and go back to diplomacy. They are more vocal on condemning Israel for violating Iranian sovereignty and for violating international law as they present it. I think we do not see military supply or any military commitment, and that's very consistent with how China deals with such crises. I'm not sure about the flights. It's something that we need to verify. What Farzin mentioned, actually, the intelligence community must say what's going on there, because the open source world is deliberating about that. Strategically, I think China is concerned. It doesn't want to see regime collapse in Iran and an inspiration for regime instability elsewhere, including and first and foremost in Beijing. It doesn't like so much to see America as a victorious or I would say a trusted guarantor of security to allies and partners. And at the same time, it wouldn't be bad for China if America entangles itself in the Middle East instead of the Indo-Pacific. I think what China may see maybe at the most probability that America gets what it wants and then is suddenly free to go and deal with the Indo-Pacific as the current administration believes it's the highest priority.
Terrific. Thanks, Asaf. Mike Knights, we've gotten a lot of questions here about the biggest, elephant in the room, which is the overall stability of the Iranian regime. You're a military historian, you're an expert on the region, you've looked at these issues for a long time, and you've studied the history. From a sort of big picture, broad overview, what would some of the early indicators of regime frailty look like to you? What would you be looking for in this moment?
Okay, well, I'll be channeling a lot of what I hear from our colleagues at the Institute recently and over the years, and we've obviously dealt with a lot of moments when regimes have been changed, when they've simply collapsed, or when they've frayed around the edges and softened at the center and become sort of zombie regimes that just stumbled onwards with decreasing amounts of vitality. I'll just say this. First of all, these regimes have got a lot more durability than they're typically believed to have. Yes, regime change comes quick, but a smart man the other day told me regime change always happens in places you're not expecting it. It never happens in places you are expecting it. So this system can protect itself and it can survive, most likely. The model that keeps jumping out at me, and possibly because I know it well, but it's Saddam's Iraq in the late 90s. If you think about it, the regime survives. It has a degree of internal cohesion and control. It still has some conventional weapons that its neighbors are worried about. It might have a weapons of mass destruction program its neighbors are worried about. It has an ongoing dispute with the international community over the access of nuclear and weapons inspectors. It has difficulties exporting its oil and some controls on those. It's deeply mired in sanctions, but there are growing humanitarian concerns in the country. For me, Saddam's Iraq maybe is a good indicator of what Iran might look like in coming years after this. So it's easy to damage these regimes, but it's very hard to actually push them over decisively, particularly if you've got nothing that's trying to replace the regime. In Syria, we clearly have stuff that's trying to replace the regime. We don't have that in Iran. Look, if Supreme Leader Khamenei dies, even though it'll be very destabilizing in other ways, it'll cause some escalation, no doubt. It might hasten the fragmentation, weakening at the center of the Iranian regime. It might create rival camps within that regime. But I think Farzin probably has got the Iranians' perspective on this much more than I ever will.
Well, the Iranian position on this, obviously, there are many different positions. Those minority that support the regime, they are very much against the Israeli operation. But there are other people, there are other ordinary Iranians who blame the Iranian regime itself for everything that is happening, because they blame it for the war that it waged against Israel for quite a long time, for its proxy strategy that shifted a lot of resources to those proxy groups across the Middle East, and for investing a lot, so much actually, on its missile projects, on its nuclear projects, and those missile bases across the country, and leaving the main infrastructure in Iran so much under functioning, under resourced, and with a lot of people in rural areas, in areas of Iran in bad condition. Therefore, the views are obviously very, very much different. But with regard to regime change, I think what we could look at is more like a regime collapse, and this could happen, or still can happen, if things happen very, very quickly and very unexpectedly. I think there was a very good chance of regime collapse during the first hours or day of this campaign if those targeted operations potentially expanded to political leadership. That could probably change the whole dynamics. But with things happening gradually, I think that the chances of a regime collapse are not as big. But you never know. You know, things can happen in these circumstances very, very quickly and very unexpectedly, as Mike said. And we have to see what could happen. But in terms of alternatives compared to other countries in the region, I think one big difference is Iran has a very rooted civil society, and that could help in a post-regime environment and to recover quickly. I think yes, there should be some frictions among ethnic groups. Iran has many ethnicities, but in general, I think there is this unifying cohesion among all Iranian ethnicities that can help to avoid chaos, post regime chaos, and come together for a political solution. I'm kind of hopeful for it.
Well, thank you, Farzin. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Anna and Asaf as well. That concludes today's Policy Forum on the current Israel-Iran conflict. I want to say thank you again to all of our panelists. I always learn so much from my colleagues here at the Washington Institute. I'm thrilled that we were able to do this publicly and share their expertise with the public. If you want to find this Policy Forum and others, you can go to our website at washingtoninstitute.org. And until next time, thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you later.